September 1944. The Allied armies have broken out of Normandy and are racing across France and Belgium. The end of the war in Europe feels tantalizingly close, perhaps just a few months away. In the High Command, a new, audacious plan is born. A plan to bypass the formidable Siegfried Line, cross the Rhine River, and strike directly into Germany's industrial heartland. It was codenamed Operation Market Garden, a two-part operation. Market, the largest airborne assault in history, and Garden, the ground offensive to link up with the paratroopers. The goal was to seize a series of crucial bridges in the Netherlands, creating a 64-mile corridor for Allied armor to pour through. If it worked, the war could be over by Christmas. 3 entire airborne divisions, the American 101st and 82nd, and the British 1st, were tasked with dropping from the sky to capture their objectives. The 101st would take the bridges around Eindhoven. The 82nd would secure the bridges at Grave and Nijmegen. And furthest north, the most critical and dangerous target of all, was the bridge over the Lower Rhine at Arnhem, assigned to the British Red Devils of the 1st Airborne Division. For these elite soldiers, it was the mission they had trained for, a chance to finally prove their mettle in a decisive action. But from the very beginning, the seeds of disaster were being sown. Intelligence warnings about the presence of experienced German panzer divisions resting and refitting near Arnhem were dismissed. The plan, though brilliant on paper, was rigid, depending on a perfect sequence of events, with little room for error or delay. The weather, the landing zones, the speed of the ground advance, everything had to go exactly as planned. On the foggy morning of September 17th, the skies over England roared to life. Over 2,000 aircraft transports, tugs, and gliders formed a colossal air armada, a stream of steel stretching for miles. Inside the rattling fuselages of C-47s, young men, their faces a mixture of nervous anticipation and quiet resolve, checked their gear one last time. They were the tip of the spear, about to leap into the unknown. As the formations crossed the English Channel and flew over occupied Holland, the scale of the operation was breathtaking. Thousands of parachutes blossomed in the sky, a silent, colorful invasion descending upon the Dutch countryside. The initial landings for the American divisions went surprisingly well. The 101st and 82nd Airborne secured many of their primary objectives, despite pockets of determined German resistance. Dutch civilians, ecstatic at the sight of their liberators, poured into the streets, waving orange flags and offering whatever help they could. But at Arnhem, the British 1st Airborne ran into immediate, serious trouble. Their designated landing zones were a full 8 miles from their primary objective, the Arnhem Bridge. This critical distance was chosen to avoid anti-aircraft guns, but it meant a long, arduous march through unknown territory. Worse, the intelligence failure proved catastrophic. The paratroopers weren't met by old men and boys, but by elements of 2 battle-hardened SS Panzer divisions, the 9th and 10th. What was supposed to be a swift capture of the bridge turned into a desperate, running battle through the woods and suburbs of Arnhem. German resistance was immediate, fierce, and highly effective. They quickly cut off the main British force from the small group that had managed to race ahead. That small group, led by the charismatic Lieutenant Colonel John Frost, miraculously reached the northern end of the Arnhem Ridge. Numbering only around 750 men, they dug in, occupying the surrounding houses and creating a small, defiant fortress. They were armed only with light infantry weapons, but they were determined to hold the bridge until the main ground forces arrived. For 4 days and nights, Frost's men fought a heroic, impossible battle. They repelled repeated attacks by German infantry, tanks, and self-propelled guns. The houses they defended were systematically pounded into rubble around them, but they refused to yield. Their stand at the Arnhem Bridge would become one of the most legendary last stands in military history, a testament to sheer grit and courage. The sounds of their struggle, the crack of rifles and the boom of explosions, echoed across the Rhine, a desperate call for help. Meanwhile, the Garden part of the operation, the ground advance of the British the 30th Corps, was struggling. Their path was a single narrow road, quickly dubbed Hell's Highway. This elevated causeway was flanked by soft, marshy ground, making it impossible for tanks and vehicles to maneuver off the road. The Germans, masters of defense, realized this vulnerability immediately. They launched relentless ambushes from the woods and farms lining the highway, hitting the armored column with anti-tank guns, artillery, and infantry. Every German roadblock, every destroyed bridge caused massive traffic jams, halting the entire advance for precious hours, sometimes days. The spearhead of the 30th Corps was fighting its own brutal battle, inching its way forward through a gauntlet of fire and steel. The tight schedule of Market Garden was already slipping away. The paratroopers of the 82nd Airborne at Nijmegen faced their own desperate fight. The crucial road bridge there remained in German hands, defended with lethal determination. To break the stalemate, the 82nd planned one of the most courageous actions of the war, a daylight river assault across the wide Vaal River in flimsy canvas boats. Under a storm of machine gun and cannon fire, the paratroopers paddled across. Casualties were horrific. The river ran red, and many boats were sunk before they even reached the far bank. But somehow, through sheer willpower, enough men made it across, stormed the German positions, and finally secured the northern end of the bridge. The way to Arnhem was, at last, open. Tanks of the 30th Corps rumbled across the newly captured bridge and prepared to race the final 11 miles to relieve the besieged British. But it was too late. Back at Arnhem, Colonel Frost's men at the bridge had been overwhelmed. Wounded, out of ammunition, and completely cut off, the survivors were finally forced to surrender. The radio messages had faded to silence. The small pocket of resistance at the bridge was no more. The main body of the 1st Airborne, which had been trying to fight its way through to them, was now itself trapped in a small pocket west of Arnhem, around a village called Oosterbeek. They formed a defensive perimeter, their backs to the Rhine, and endured a week of hell. They were pounded by constant German artillery and mortar fire, and attacked relentlessly by tanks and infantry. Supplies of food, ammunition, and medical aid were critically low. Attempts to airdrop supplies often failed, with the precious canisters falling into German hands. The perimeter shrank daily, the number of casualties mounting at an appalling rate. They were holding on by a thread, hoping against hope that the 30th Corps would somehow break through. But the armored advance from Nijmegen had stalled just short of Arnhem. German defenses had solidified, and the single road was still a death trap. The window of opportunity had closed. After 9 days of brutal combat, the heartbreaking decision was made to withdraw what was left of the 1st Airborne Division. On the night of September 25th, under the cover of darkness and a torrential downpour, the evacuation began. Codenamed Operation Berlin, it was a desperate, chaotic retreat across the Rhine. The survivors, exhausted and ghost-like, staggered down to the riverbank, waiting for small boats to ferry them to safety. German machine guns and mortar opened up, turning the crossing into a final, nightmarish ordeal. Many men didn't make it. Of the more than 10,000 men of the British 1st Airborne Division who had landed, fewer than 2,400 escaped. The rest were killed, wounded, or captured. Operation Market Garden had failed. The bold gamble to end the war by Christmas had ended in tragedy and defeat. The Arnhem Bridge, the final objective, was described by a British general as a bridge too far. The cost was immense, nearly 17,000 Allied casualties. The failure meant the war would drag on through a bitter winter, costing hundreds of thousands more lives. Yet, within the failure lies a story of incredible bravery and sacrifice. The paratroopers who jumped into Holland fought with a courage that stunned their enemies and inspired the world. Their fight, especially the doomed stand at Arnhem, remains a powerful and somber lesson in the realities of war, where courage alone is not always enough to overcome flawed plans and the friction of battle. The largest airborne operation in history became one of its most tragic episodes. Thank you for watching. If you found this story of heroism and history compelling, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel for more deep dives into the pivotal moments that shaped our world. Your support helps us continue to tell these important stories. We'll see you in the next one.